Me. Imagine waking up one morning to discover that 39 perfectly healthy adults had willingly ended their own lives. No signs of panic, no struggle, no forced entry, no blood, no screams. Me. Each person was lying peacefully in bed, dressed almost identically. They wore black shirts, black sweatpants, brand new Nike sneakers, and neatly folded purple shrouds covered their bodies. Beside each of them sat a small travel bag containing a few personal belongings, identification, and just enough money to start a new life. Except, they never planned on using any of it, because they believed they were about to leave Earth forever. Not through death. Not in the way you and I understand it. They believed a spacecraft was waiting for them beyond the sky. A spacecraft hidden behind a comet. A spacecraft that would carry their souls to a higher level of existence. To the outside world, it looked like one of the most shocking mass suicides in American history. But to the people inside that mansion, this wasn't the end. It was graduation. And the most disturbing part of this story is that these weren't uneducated or isolated people. Among them were computer programmers, college graduates, military veterans, business owners, parents, brothers, sisters, people who had families that loved them, people who willingly abandoned everything because they believed one man held the key to eternal life. Me? How could 39 intelligent adults become convinced that leaving their bodies was the only way to board an alien spacecraft? The answer begins decades before anyone had ever heard the name Heaven's Gate. Welcome to the Midnight Archive, where history's darkest crimes, forgotten mysteries, and unbelievable true stories come back to life through cinematic documentaries. If you enjoy true crime, unsolved mysteries, and the events that changed America forever, subscribe now, because tonight we're uncovering one of the strangest and most disturbing cult stories ever recorded. The story begins in the early 1970s. America was changing. The Vietnam War had shaken public trust. The counterculture movement had encouraged millions to question authority. Interest in spirituality exploded across the country. People searched for answers in meditation, Eastern religions, UFO sightings, psychic phenomena, and New Age philosophy. It was the perfect environment for someone claiming to possess extraordinary knowledge. Marshall Applewhite was not born a cult leader. He entered the world on May 17, 1931, in Spur, Texas. His father was a respected Presbyterian minister. Religion surrounded him from childhood: church services, Bible study, faith, discipline. Everything suggested he would eventually follow in his father's footsteps. For many years, he did exactly that. Applewhite studied music and developed an impressive singing voice. He dreamed of becoming an opera singer. He worked as a music professor. Friends described him as polite, intelligent, charismatic, and deeply religious. But beneath that calm personality, he struggled. His career never became what he hoped. His marriage began falling apart. He questioned his identity. He experienced emotional breakdowns. Eventually, he lost both his teaching position and much of his personal stability. By the late 1960s, Marshall Applewhite believed his life had completely collapsed. Then, everything changed. While recovering from emotional problems in a hospital, he met a nurse named Bonnie Nettles. Their meeting would alter both of their lives and eventually end dozens more. Bonnie Nettles possessed a fascination with astrology, mysticism, reincarnation, and communication with higher beings. She believed she had received spiritual messages guiding her toward an important mission. When she met Applewhite, she became convinced destiny had brought them together. Applewhite quickly accepted the idea. The two developed an intense spiritual partnership. Neither believed their meeting was accidental. They believed they had been chosen. According to their own stories, supernatural forces had directed them toward one another. They spent countless hours discussing religion, science fiction, UFO reports, biblical prophecy, and the future of humanity. Slowly, their beliefs transformed into something entirely unique. They rejected traditional Christianity while borrowing many of its symbols. They spoke about Jesus, but they also spoke about extraterrestrials. They taught that Earth was nothing more than a temporary classroom. Human bodies, they claimed, were simply vehicles, temporary containers, like cars. The real person existed inside, and someday, those souls would leave Earth and join a higher civilization somewhere in space. According to Applewhite and Nettles, advanced beings from another level of existence occasionally visited Earth. Throughout history, these beings had been mistaken for angels, or gods, or prophets. Jesus himself, they claimed, had been one of them. Now, it was their turn. They announced that they too had been sent by this advanced civilization. Their mission was simple: prepare humanity for departure before Earth's coming destruction. Not everyone could go, only those willing to abandon everything: family, friendships, money, careers, romantic relationships, personal identity, even their own names. Followers would eventually receive new names representing their new lives. Individuality became discouraged. Sameness became celebrated. The goal was no longer happiness. The goal was transformation. Applewhite possessed something almost impossible to explain. People listened. His voice remained calm, gentle, convincing. He rarely shouted. He rarely appeared angry. Instead, he spoke with certainty, absolute certainty. And certainty can be incredibly persuasive when someone feels lost. In 1975, Applewhite and Nettles began traveling across the United States, holding public meetings. They rented community halls, placed small newspaper advertisements, distributed flyers. The advertisements were mysterious. They promised answers to life's greatest questions. They invited anyone curious about UFOs, spirituality, or the future of humanity. Most people attended out of curiosity. Most left shaking their heads. But not everyone. Some stayed. Those who remained often described feeling understood for the first time in their lives. Many had struggled with loneliness, depression, broken families, failed relationships. They were searching for purpose. Applewhite offered exactly that. A mission greater than themselves. He insisted that human society was hopelessly corrupted. Governments lied. Religion had failed. Material possessions trapped the soul. Only complete separation from worldly life could prepare someone for the next level. Followers gradually surrendered everything: bank accounts, homes, cars, jobs, photographs, family contact. Some disappeared without warning, leaving confused parents wondering where their sons and daughters had gone. Police occasionally received missing person reports. But investigators found no evidence of crimes. Adults had voluntarily chosen to leave. The group lived simply. They traveled constantly, sleeping in campsites, motels, rental homes. Members shared nearly everything. Personal possessions became unnecessary. Discipline became absolute. Daily schedules were tightly controlled. Meals, cleaning, study sessions, exercise. Everything followed strict routines. Applewhite believed discipline weakened human desires. The less attached members became to ordinary life. The closer they came to the next level, romantic relationships were forbidden. Marriage ended. Sexual attraction became something to eliminate rather than control. Some male followers even chose surgical castration, believing it would remove earthly temptation forever. Outsiders found these beliefs disturbing. Followers considered them liberation. Applewhite gradually became known simply as Do. Bonnie Nettles became T.I. Together, they weren't merely teachers. They believed they were the two witnesses described in the biblical book of Revelation. The final messengers before humanity faced judgment. Many followers accepted this completely. Questioning became rare. Obedience became normal. Families desperately tried reaching loved ones. Letters often went unanswered. Phone calls stopped. Birthdays passed in silence. Parents mourned children who were technically still alive. Former members later explained that leaving the group felt almost impossible. Not because they were physically imprisoned, but because they had become emotionally dependent. The group became their entire world. Their friends, their family, their purpose. Everything outside the movement seemed meaningless. Then, in 1985, the foundation of Heaven's Gate was shaken. Bonnie Nettles died of liver cancer. For years, she had taught followers that faithful believers would physically ascend into the next level without experiencing ordinary death. Her death created an enormous problem. If T had truly been chosen, why had she died? Many believed the movement would collapse. Instead, Marshall Applewhite offered a new explanation. He told followers that Bonnie had simply left her physical vehicle early. Her body had completed its purpose. Her soul had already advanced to the next level. Death, he insisted, was never failure. It was transition. The explanation saved the movement, but it also made Applewhite the unquestioned leader. Without Bonnie beside him, his influence became even stronger, and over the next decade, his teachings would grow increasingly extreme, until one extraordinary event appeared in the night sky. An event that Applewhite believed was the final sign, a bright comet, known as Hale-Bopp, and when his followers looked up into the heavens, they believed their ride home had finally arrived. The appearance of Comet Hale-Bopp in 1996 captured the imagination of millions around the world. Astronomers described it as one of the brightest comets visible in the 20th century. For months, newspapers published photographs of its glowing tail stretching across the night sky. Television stations invited scientists to explain the rare event. Families gathered outside after sunset just to catch a glimpse. To most people, Hale-Bopp was simply another beautiful astronomical event. To Marshall Applewhite, it was something entirely different. He told his followers that the comet was not traveling alone. Hidden behind it, invisible to ordinary human eyes, was a massive spacecraft. Not an ordinary spacecraft. The spacecraft. The one they had been waiting for throughout their entire lives. Applewhite claimed that advanced beings from the next level had arrived to collect those who had successfully completed their preparation on Earth. Time, he warned, was running out. If they hesitated, the opportunity would disappear forever. For the members of Heaven's Gate, this announcement changed everything. The decades of sacrifice suddenly made sense. Leaving their families, giving away their possessions, rejecting careers, living under strict discipline. All of it had been preparing them for this single moment. Members became even more devoted. Every action now felt urgent. They believed humanity stood on the edge of a great transformation. Earth, according to Applewhite, was about to undergo a complete recycling. The world as everyone knew it would soon be erased. Only those who willingly left their human bodies could escape and enter the next level. To outsiders, these ideas sounded impossible. But inside the group, questioning had almost disappeared. Most followers had spent years surrounding themselves only with others who shared the same beliefs. Their entire reality had been reshaped. Information from the outside world was viewed as deception. Friends who criticized the movement were seen as obstacles. Family members were considered distractions. The only voices that truly mattered belonged to Applewhite and the community around him. Psychologists later explained that this is one of the most powerful effects of high control groups. When people spend years inside an environment where every belief is constantly reinforced, even impossible ideas can begin to feel completely logical. The group eventually settled into a large rented mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California. From the outside, the property looked peaceful. Beautiful gardens, luxury homes nearby, quiet streets. Nothing suggested that history was quietly unfolding behind those walls. Neighbors rarely noticed anything unusual. The residents were polite, friendly. They paid their rent on time. They kept the property clean. Many spent long hours working on computers. By the mid-1990s, the internet was still new. Heaven's Gate recognized its potential earlier than many organizations. Members designed websites, created graphics, built software. Some worked as professional web designers, earning enough money to support the entire group. Ironically, a movement preparing to leave Earth used some of the most advanced technology available at the time. Visitors entering the mansion noticed remarkable organization. Everything appeared orderly. Beds were neatly made, shoes perfectly aligned, schedules carefully followed. Members dressed similarly. Haircuts looked almost identical. Individual identity continued fading. Applewhite encouraged followers to think of themselves not as men or women, but as students preparing for graduation. He frequently reminded them that their human bodies were temporary containers. Nothing more. One former member later explained that Applewhite often referred to the body as a vehicle. just as someone eventually leaves an old car behind. He believed the soul would eventually leave the human body. The comparison made death sound almost ordinary, even practical. As the comet drew closer, Applewhite began recording a series of farewell messages. The videos still exist today. Watching them is deeply unsettling. Applewhite sits calmly before the camera wearing dark clothing. His eyes remain focused. His voice soft, measured, peaceful. He smiles occasionally. He never sounds frightened. Instead, he speaks with complete confidence. He tells viewers that the members of Heaven's Gate are preparing to exit their human vehicles. Not because they are hopeless. Not because they are depressed. But because they are returning home. To his followers, these videos strengthened their faith. To everyone else, they revealed how completely Applewhite believed his own teachings. By early March 1997, preparations entered their final stage. Members carefully organized their belongings. They packed identical bags. Each person carried simple clothing, identification, a few dollars in cash, one $5 bill, several quarters. The reason remains debated. Some investigators believed the money represented practical supplies for an imagined journey. Others suggested it reflected the group's habit of always being prepared. Whatever the explanation, every detail had been carefully planned. Members also purchased matching black shirts, black sweatpants, and identical black Nike Decade athletic shoes. The choice would later become one of the most recognizable images associated with the case. Purple cloths were prepared to cover each body after death. Everything followed strict order. Nothing appeared random. During their final days together, members shared meals, cleaned the house, watched movies, talked quietly. Several wrote farewell letters. Many expressed excitement rather than fear. One member described the coming event as the happiest moment of their existence. Another thanked Applewhite for showing them the path to eternal life. Reading the letters today is heartbreaking. Many writers genuinely believed they were beginning a wonderful new journey. On March 22, 1997, the final plan began. Investigators later concluded that the deaths occurred in 3 separate groups over approximately 3 days. The process itself was remarkably organized. Each group helped prepare the next. Members consumed a mixture of phenobarbital and alcohol. Plastic bags were then placed over their heads to ensure death. Those who remained alive carefully arranged the bodies. Purple cloths covered each face and upper body. The room stayed neat, peaceful, almost clinical. Then the next group repeated the process. Finally, only Marshall Applewhite and a small number of followers remained. Eventually, there was nobody left to continue. Silence filled the mansion. Outside, life continued normally. Cars drove through Rancho Santa Fe. Children played. Neighbors walked their dogs. Nobody realized that inside the house, 39 people had already lost their lives. Days passed. Then, on March 26, a package arrived at the offices of a former Heaven's Gate member. Inside was a videotape. The tape contained farewell messages and instructions. Concerned by what he saw, the recipient immediately contacted authorities. Deputies from the San Diego County Sheriff's Department drove to the mansion. Nothing appeared unusual from outside. The lawn was perfectly maintained. Curtains covered the windows. The front door was locked. When officers entered, they immediately noticed an eerie silence. Then, the first body, then another, and another. Room after room revealed the same scene. Rows of people lying peacefully on bunk beds and mattresses. Identically dressed, purple cloths covering their faces, brand new black Nike shoes on every pair of feet. Investigators stopped counting at first because the number seemed impossible. Eventually, the final total reached 39. It became the largest known mass suicide on American soil connected to a single cult. The discovery shocked the world. Television helicopters surrounded the neighborhood. News crews gathered outside the mansion. Within hours, every major network interrupted programming. Images of the black Nike shoes appeared across newspapers worldwide. Reporters struggled to explain what had happened. Many initially described the victims as brainwashed fanatics. Others asked a more difficult question. How had so many intelligent adults become convinced that death was merely boarding a spaceship? The investigation found no evidence of murder, no signs of forced participation, no struggle, no defensive injuries. The evidence overwhelmingly suggested that each member had willingly followed the plan. For many families, that conclusion offered little comfort. Parents who had spent years hoping their sons or daughters would eventually return home now faced unimaginable grief. Some had not spoken to their loved ones for decades. Others had received occasional letters, but never understood how deeply involved they had become. One family member later admitted that even after learning the truth, part of them still expected their loved one to walk through the front door, because accepting reality felt impossible. As investigators searched the mansion, they discovered hundreds of videotapes, computers, photographs, written instructions, personal journals. Every item helped reconstruct the group's final months. What emerged was both fascinating and deeply disturbing, because almost every member truly believed they were not dying. They believed they were leaving. There were no signs of panic, no broken furniture, no desperate attempts to escape. Everything inside the mansion suggested calm acceptance. Beds were neatly arranged. Rooms were spotless. Even the kitchen looked as though someone had simply finished dinner and stepped outside. Except, nobody was ever coming back. Medical examiners carefully documented every detail. Each member wore nearly identical clothing. Black shirt, black sweatpants, brand new black Nike Decade sneakers, a purple cloth covering the face. Beside nearly every body sat a small overnight bag. Inside were simple personal items, identification cards, a few dollars in cash, several quarters. The contents puzzled investigators. If these people believed they were traveling to another world, why carry money? Former members later explained that Heaven's Gate taught followers to remain prepared for every situation. Even their imagined journey to the next level deserved careful planning. The mansion itself revealed even more. Computers filled several rooms. Unlike many isolated cults, Heaven's Gate embraced technology. Members operated a successful web design business. They built websites for paying clients. Ironically, a group preparing to leave Earth forever helped shape the early internet. The money they earned paid rent, bought food, and supported the community. This wasn't a group living in complete isolation from society. Many members were highly intelligent. Several had college degrees. Some had careers in engineering, education, nursing, and computer programming before joining the movement. That fact fascinated psychologists. For decades, people assumed only uneducated or vulnerable individuals joined destructive cults. Heaven's Gate challenged that belief. Intelligence alone was no protection against manipulation. Experts who later studied the group identified several powerful psychological techniques: isolation, constant reinforcement, a clear purpose, and us versus them worldview. Gradually, members stopped trusting their own judgment. Instead, they trusted only Marshall Applewhite, and once someone accepts that a single person possesses absolute truth, questioning becomes increasingly difficult. The media quickly transformed Heaven's Gate into an international sensation. Television stations replayed Applewhite's farewell videos repeatedly. His intense eyes, his calm voice, his unwavering confidence. Millions watched in disbelief. Some laughed at the bizarre beliefs. Others felt genuine sadness. Many simply couldn't understand. How could anyone believe a spaceship was hiding behind a comet? Astronomers immediately addressed the claim. There was no spacecraft, no mysterious object following Hale-Bopp. The rumor had originated from a misunderstanding involving an amateur astronomer's photograph and was later amplified through speculation. Professional observations found nothing unusual beyond the comet itself. But for Heaven's Gate, evidence no longer mattered. Their decision had already been made. As news spread, families of the victims began speaking publicly. Many admitted they had spent years trying to reconnect with loved ones. Some had written countless letters. Others traveled across the country hoping for a meeting. Most efforts failed. Former members described how difficult leaving the group had become, not because anyone physically prevented them, but because they feared losing the only family they believed truly understood them. Several who escaped later admitted they had once considered participating in the final event. One former member left only months before the tragedy. He later confessed that, had he remained died, he likely would have died alongside everyone else. That realization haunted him for the rest of his life. Questions about Marshall Applewhite himself continued long after the investigation ended. Did he truly believe everything he taught? Or was he knowingly deceiving his followers? No one can answer with certainty. Psychologists remain divided. Some argue Applewhite displayed symptoms of severe delusional beliefs. Others believe he gradually convinced himself of ideas he originally created. Whatever the truth, his influence over 38 other people was undeniable. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of Heaven's Gate wasn't the final act. It was the years leading up to it. No single speech convinced members overnight. No dramatic event instantly transformed ordinary people into devoted followers. Instead, it happened slowly. One conversation, one meeting, one belief, then another, until reality itself quietly changed. History has shown this pattern before, and unfortunately, it continues to appear in different forms around the world, not always through cults, sometimes through extremist movements, conspiracy communities, fraudulent spiritual leaders, online echo chambers. The methods change. Human psychology does not. People searching for belonging often become vulnerable to those offering absolute certainty. Heaven's Gate became one of the clearest examples of that reality. The mansion in Rancho Santa Fe eventually returned to silence. The property was later sold, renovated, even given a new address to reduce unwanted attention. Today, nothing about the neighborhood immediately suggests one of America's strangest tragedies occurred there. Cars pass by, families live nearby, children ride bicycles along quiet streets. Life moved forward, yet the story refuses to disappear. Decades later, documentaries continue examining the case. Books explore the group's history. Psychologists study its methods. Universities teach it as an example of coercive persuasion and group psychology. Even more surprising, the Heaven's Gate website still exists. Created by members before their deaths, it has remained online for years, maintained by former followers who did not participate in the final event. Its simple pages still describe the beliefs that convinced 39 people to leave everything behind. For many visitors, opening the website feels like stepping back into 1997, frozen in time. The black Nike shoes also became unexpectedly famous. Collectors eventually sought identical pairs. The manufacturer even stopped producing that particular model after it became permanently associated with the tragedy. A simple pair of athletic shoes became one of the most haunting symbols in true crime history. Marshall Applewhite believed his followers had boarded a spacecraft hidden behind comet Hale-Bopp. The comet eventually continued its journey through the solar system. No spacecraft ever appeared. No signal arrived from another world. No one returned. Only silence remained. Looking back, it is tempting to dismiss Heaven's Gate as a bizarre chapter that could never happen again. But that would ignore its most important lesson. The story was never really about UFOs, or comets, or spaceships. It was about the human need to belong, to feel understood, to find purpose. Those desires exist in every generation. Most people satisfy them through family, friendship, faith, community. Others, however, encounter someone who promises certainty instead of questions. Someone who claims to possess every answer. Someone who slowly replaces independent thought with complete obedience. That is where stories like Heaven's Gate begin. Not with death, but with trust. The 39 people inside that California mansion were not born into a cult. They laughed, worked, fell in love, dreamed about the future, just like everyone else. Their lives remind us that manipulation rarely begins with obvious lies. It often begins with kindness, understanding, acceptance. Then, one small compromise at a time, freedom quietly disappears. On the night of March 26, 1997, America looked at 39 identical beds and asked one question: how could this happen, nearly 3 decades later? The answer remains both simple and terrifying, because the greatest danger was never the comet. It was the person who convinced others that questioning was no longer necessary. And perhaps that's why Heaven's Gate continues to fascinate the world. Not because of what its members believed, but because it reminds us how powerful belief itself can become when placed in the wrong hands. Some mysteries remain unsolved. Some crimes never find justice. And some stories don't end with a killer, They end with a choice that changed 39 lives forever. And as long as people continue searching for certainty in an uncertain world, the story of Heaven's Gate will remain one of the most chilling warnings in American history. Thanks for watching The Midnight Archive. If this story left you questioning how belief can reshape reality, subscribe for more cinematic true crime documentaries and forgotten mysteries from America's darkest chapters. Until next time, stay curious and never stop asking questions.